Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar by Cvent. My name is David Rowlands. I'm the head of content at B2B Marketing and Propolis, which is the global community for B2B marketers. And today we're going to be talking about how you can really amplify your live events, as the title suggests, and get maximum impact and engagement from all of your attendees. So over the course of today's event, we're going to discuss the importance of an always-on event marketing strategy that makes use of personalized content programs to offer year-round engagement and community building. In addition to that, we're going to discuss how you can engage your attendees and maximize your event content pre, during, and post-event, how to understand how to use different event types throughout the buyer journey, how to create a unified event program that tells a story and really helps you to build your community. And lastly, how to embrace technology in your live events to really enhance that attendee experience and prove ROI with the data captured. So just before we do begin, it's worth saying that we will be hosting a live Q&A at the end of today's event. So please do get any of your questions in throughout the session, and we'll look to answer as many of those as we can at the end. And don't worry, sometimes people are a bit shy to ask a question. If you're thinking it, I guarantee you at least one other person is. So please don't be shy and get in any questions you can, because now is the perfect time to ask them. So it's not just going to be me today. I've got a couple of guests. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our first guest to the stage. So Felicia Seydoux, would you please join me on stage and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your experience with live events?
Well, thank you for inviting me to the stage. As you said, my name's Felicia Seydoux. I know it's a senior marketing manager. Just got a promotion, I have to say. I'm now the director of marketing, which I find really weird to say, but it is true. I run the marketing team for Cvent in Europe for the event management side of things, and run lots and lots of events each year. Some of you may have come to Cvent Connect Europe before. But yeah, I run loads of events and definitely attend lots of events. There seems to be more than ever at the moment. But we're more than just events. Like I said, it's full-on marketing. So that's, web, digital, email marketing, all the different channels, and definitely a 360-degree style of marketing here at Cvent. So that's me.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the promotion, first and foremost. Well deserved. My second panelist, Steve Kennish, would you mind joining me on stage? And again, just telling us a bit about yourself and your experience with digital live events.
Yes, thank you very much, David. Hello, everyone. So no promotion for me, I'm afraid. Demotion, probably, for many reasons. So I have a number of hats. I work in and around the Propolis community, which is one of the largest B2B marketing communities in the world. I help in there on best practice and content. I'm an AEO, the Association of Event Organisers Judge. And I have a full-time job where I work in an organisation where we work with lots of different business-to-business brands predominantly, but some B2C as well, on a wider marketing mix. But events is a big part of that. And I am a very passionate events geek. So I'm here to share as well as learn from everybody on this really, really important topic.
Fantastic. So lots of experience in the room. So even more reason for our viewers to start getting those questions in. But first thing I'd like to do before we do that is just kick things off with a quick poll, which should be on the right of everyone's screen now, which simply asks, which kind of events are you involved in? Obviously, as marketers, there's a number of ways you can get involved in events. So we just want to understand a little bit exactly who's with us today, just so that we can really tailor this session to your needs and what you're really looking to do. But as we wait for that to come in, Felicia, I'm just going to come to you for this first one. It's no secret that sort of over the past 2-3 years and COVID and all the rest of it, there's been a massive change in the world of events. With that in mind, what do you think the current event landscape looks like right now?
I think if I could use one word, I was using the word positive, but actually I'm changing the word positive to optimistic. And I think that's because, if we look back at 2019 and before, people were generally positive. They'd phone up and say, hey, I've got an event on this day, this time. They were positively driving towards that moment and being quite confident in that. And then, as you say, it all got shook up. That word I use to describe things is hopeful. We hope it happens. We hope that we can get the right tech. And that was just a different kind of feeling. Still, in a very happy vein, but just hopeful. Now it's optimistic. It's what could we do? What heights could we reach? How many people could come? What tech could we use? What AI could I use? It's just an absolute explosion of optimism and thinking about what could be next.
Yeah, fantastic. Steve, is that something you agree with, or are you more of a glass half empty kind of person?
No, mine is completely full, if not overfloweth, David. I think I agree with Felicia. I think there's been a pent-up demand. If you look more macro, just as we return back to and start to forget the pandemic, people just want to spend time with people. So events are a perfect way to do it. And big events and small, and I made this case before recently elsewhere, that you need to think of events as one-to-one as well as one-to-masses. So they've all got a real value, and that's, I'm sure we'll kick around a bit today, is what kind of event at what stage of the journey or the relationship. But the underlying thread for me is that, that real enthusiasm and positivity. There are some considerations. How do you make it worth me coming to your event? That sort of question, but that's not a new one. And I think, to Felicia's point, the opportunity to employ people and technology and some creativity into events is better than it's ever been before.
Fantastic. So let's have a look at those poll results, which we should have a few of those in now. And let's just kind of get an idea of where our viewers are at. So if we could bring that on screen, and let's see what we see. Well, as we wait for those to come in, perhaps we'll crack on. So, Steve, what do you think the audience do expect today that they haven't perhaps expected in previous years? Has anything changed, do you think, or is it kind of the same thing as always?
No, I think it has. I think it's more of a nervy journey to be an events manager and events organizer than ever before. You're seeing patterns of change, and that's born out of that desire to be perhaps impressed more, and also to be more practical. So people are booking up to events later, I'm certainly seeing, than you might have seen in the last few years. Their ability to say no is easier than before. Why? Because digital technology has meant you might have only had one chance to meet somebody or a brand in a physical space. Well, now with the onslaught of technology, it becomes a harder choice to come to a physical event. Now, this isn't all about physical events, but there's such a key opportunity there. You need to think even harder about what's the sizzle, what's going to get me as a potential attendee of your event to come out of my status quo, to physically travel to you, particularly in the backdrop where a lot of people's working patterns have vastly changed. So the ideas that people would have been in the office is just not there in the same way. So the localities needs to be important. The timings of it need to be important. So all the practical stuff, but you mustn't miss the sizzle, the bit that gets me excited. And that comes down to one key word, which is content, the best possible content for your event. Yeah,
fantastic. I mean, Felicia, is that something you agree with? Is content still absolutely king in terms of delivering that sizzle? Or is there anything else that you think can really make an event shine?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I used to work in content. It was my role. My sole job was to make it, and I still love it to pieces, and I create it all the time. But I almost feel like there's maybe a king and queen relationship forming here, where content is king, but queen is that engagement, networking opportunity, real, that thing you said we've been pining for, of just getting face to face and like serendipitous moments. Like, how can we do that? And I know one of the things that we've done recently with our larger conferences, we've put really big gaps in between sessions. We used to put maybe 10 minutes of walk-in time, a little bit of turn around the room time, maybe 15 minutes in total. Now we're looking at half an hour gaps, which means that I'm actually sacrificing my content time for networking time. But people absolutely love it. They were really grateful when we did it last year. Said, thanks for giving us the opportunity to meet, talk, speak, and get together. So, I think, like I said, king and queen, I think it's a happy partnership between the two, that people need to plan in advance, because you can't do it on the fly. You've definitely got to plan for it.
Yeah. Well, Steve, let's come to you then. So, the needs have changed a little bit. Are marketers actually doing enough to meet those needs? Because that's the big question. Because they, if we're still delivering events as we were in 2017, no one's going to see much success. So, yeah, what do you think? Are marketers really stepping up to the plate, or have they still got some way to go, do you think?
I think some are. I think it's a mixed answer. There's some basics just to pick up Felicia's point around, networking. It depends where you are in the world. It's networking for some people puts the fear of God into them, frankly, and others, they absolutely live for it. So recognizing what that means for the likely audience, and then how can you enable that? So Felicia said, give space and time to it, but also where can you have tools and technology that might help for those that are a bit nervy on the sidelines? And I'm based in the UK, although I work globally. European audiences typically are a bit more shy. So how can you harness tech to make those pockets of time work better? I think the marketers that have recognised that it is a different world, and back to the content being regal, as Felicia's, whether it's king or queen, who cares? It's really important. But there's also my sizzle as well, and that's changed. So having a, in inverted commas, cool venue was always quite important. I think it probably is more so now. So if you're working to the same venues and the same cadence as pre-pandemic, then that could be a really dangerous game to play. And let me give you an basic example of somebody I know in this space. Their breakfast briefings in the City of London used to be perfect for their audiences. But people are not necessarily working in the City of London on the days they used to do them. And the idea of traveling for breakfast if you're not in London just seems expensive hassle. So fracturing those up, and they still do the briefings, but they do them at different times of day, and they've moved them around the country effectively to where the people that used to work in offices tend to live via commute. That, and then finding a new supply of cool venues, or cool, and back to the content, cool content's really important. Having somebody or something that means you're going to learn something different, you're going to see something different. That is not quite gimmick, but on the good side of really standing out is where the really good marketing events are happening.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was jumping in. I heard you talking, and I was like, cool venues. Like, you know, one of the things I keep talking about partnership as well. It's been really hard sourcing venues recently. You know, it's like all sorts of issues, and I just love the fact that, you know, when we do find somewhere called rooftops in the summertime that I didn't know existed, or, you know, the top of I probably should have known, but we went to the top of the WPP campus recently, and I was like, this is stunning. The view was absolutely outstanding, and it was a real attraction. And it's something, you know, finding these gems that you didn't know about, and then partnering with the venue to say, hey, why don't we do tours of your venue so other people can see it too? Just think it's such a cherry on top moment, really. Sorry.
Can I just come back in? I think it's such an important thing for anyone listening in, is that what might be cool as well my idea of cool will probably not be yours, because I am not cool, right? Felicia gets promotions, she's cool. I am not. So thinking about that, but you also need to therefore extend that to your brand appropriateness. So for example, having venues that are economically viable makes sense, but ecologically as well. So organizations that have an ESG target and strategy, be that the organizer or the attendees, they might find that an event that's in a venue that's much more environmentally appropriate is far more important than somewhere that's got the cool cachet of it's somewhere that the cool kids go. So think about your brand and your audience and what might be right and relevant for them.
Yeah, no, I can completely see that. I mean, another thing that kind of just springs to mind, I think, Felicia, you mentioned that it's harder to get events at the minute. I mean, another thing that I think a lot of people are seeing is that people are booking for their events a lot later. You know, they kind of leave it sort of a week up to. Why do you think that is? What do you think's made that shift, or do you actually see the total opposite?
We see both. I would say it depends on the style of event. So conferences, like I'm already booking for, you know, large scale events for 2024, and lots of people are. We're having lots of conversations around 2024 events right now, and all the way through this year. That booking trend, I think, of booking out a year in advance is returning. It was there before, and it's returning. It's not new. But there are the kind of, oh, it's only 30 people, I'm sure we can get a space. You know, there's kind of that duality happening. And I think that's because we've got two things happening: more meetings than before, like we said. So there's more on the remit of the event planners and the marketers to like, hey, let's just meet together. Let's just get together. We're not doing this on Zoom. We're going to get together. You can book that, can't you? But it's next week. And it's like, sure, just book it. And so I think that's happening a lot. We've spoken to really large corporates that you would think have really got it together, and actually, no, they're in the same boat as everybody else, where, you know, they're just taking orders basically, and they're trying to sort of stop that. And I think that's hard. The second thing to that is there was that mentality during the virtual side of things. You know, we can spin up a virtual event in what was seemingly a week. You couldn't, but it seemed that you could, and people would pull out the stops and say, yeah, I'll get it done for you. And so I think that mentality has managed to stay a bit where we should be able to just do it quickly. But it results in all sorts of issues, like Steve just mentioned about, you know, sustainability and all of that. The more you do that knee-jerk reaction of booking things last minute, the less chance you get to say, and it's got to be in an environment that does this, or let me think about my sustainable goals, or where are people traveling from, is the right thing. You don't even have time to think about that. So yeah, so I've given you a very long-winded answer and say there's quite a range of things happening for different reasons, but hopefully we'll kind of go forwards with proper planning, and therefore we'll do it in the right way.
Yeah, long-winded's good. That means more information. That's the way I would spin it. It's obviously, it's great having a really good event. You can still put all the work in the world into making it a world-class event in the best venue on the best day with the best speakers, the best content, all the rest of it. But it's obviously all going to go to waste if no one actually attends it and no one's heard of it in the first place. So Steve, coming to you, what do you think that, pre-event promotion best practice looks like? What tips do you have?
Yeah, it's a really important point. I mean, again, I don't want to go back to the pandemic, but the world has changed. Post-event used to be, in my view, the most important aspect, because up until the event, it was just a cost, including the pre-activity. And that's not to dismiss the fact that if you don't tell people you've got an event, it's not an event. It's just a lonely person in an expensive room. So you do need to get it right. But I think the pre has shifted again, that back to the point of behaviors have changed. Perhaps expectations are up. So the idea that I can book onto an event later, it will work for my new working pattern. You will excite me. You will be cool. And therefore the messaging has to be perhaps longer term, even if people book later. So the old days of where somebody might take 4 weeks out, might book for your event, might actually be more like a week, but it doesn't mean you should start a week out. You might need to give them 2 months run up to it. That technology lends itself incredibly well to that. And that's where we're in a lucky position that there's even more technology to make it easier for humans to get those messages out. But what's in the message is important too. So again, back to the sizzle. If you've got really good speakers, for example, or content, how are they going to help you? How do you create more pre-event tease content to really excite people? One. And two, and I'm not a salesperson, but having worked with salespeople, the best ones in the world realize you have to keep knocking at the door if you want somebody to answer. And I think that's the thing with pre-event, is don't just send 1 or 2 messages and expect it to happen. Don't be afraid to send perhaps 5, 6, 7, 8 messages over 2 months to really make sure it's obvious to people that they need to sign up. It creates an immediacy and an urgency, and indeed a bit of FOMO as well, that they can feel like, oh, everyone's talking about this, I should be there, rather than I'll do it and then not get round to it. And you've just missed somebody that would have been a valuable attendee just because they've forgotten or they've been distracted by something else.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Felicia, what do you think? Is that something you agree with wholeheartedly, or do you have a slightly different take?
Oh no, good panels make, when you disagree, but unfortunately we're not that good, so we're not disagreeing. We're just
no, they don't. No, they don't.
I have a different opinion. No, I have a very similar opinion, and also thinking about that, you get shy. I think sometimes as a marketer, you get told you'll get blacklisted, you'll get, people will just unsubscribe because you're emailing me far too much. And yeah, that does happen, but that probably means that person wasn't really engaged with you, didn't really want to hear from you, doesn't care what you have to say. So you just take the unsubscribe with a pinch of salt and move on to those that are interested, because what Steve was saying about that volume is so important. I know different studies have been done, I'm not going to quote any figures, but 7, 8 times, quite fine. If you ever work with a company like Sales Loft, they have cadences, which is, between you and your sales team, you can write these cadences where maybe the first interaction was marketing, brings you into the funnel, then it's sales, then it's marketing, then it's sales, then it's an ebook, then it's a webinar, then it's something else. And that is just all the different touch points that sometimes you need to get a person to say, oh, I didn't realize you were that good a company, or I didn't realize you had that product or that event or whatever it is you're doing. So I've even had people at events say to me, you seem to care, because I said no, and are you sure? You gave them back, here's another opportunity, here's another moment. And he said, I had to come because, I even had your sales guys calling me saying, come on, John, you want to come. So that's super important. And then the other thing I'll say to that is arming your sales team with knowledge that goes beyond the product or the service you're offering is essential. They need to be almost as much on the same page as you. I know that's really hard, but if you can educate them to, this is why AI is an important conversation, or sustainability or accessibility is an important conversation between you and your prospects, then when you do invite them and you start talking about those things, they might actually come because they, again, it sounds like you care rather than just you should come to my event, you know.
Yeah, of course. One word that came up a couple of times in the past sort of 5 minutes or so is urgency. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to want to start promoting an event as soon as possible because, you know, you're kind of covering your own back, aren't you? You can say, well, you know, we've promoted it for 4 months. It's not our fault. You know, we've done our bit. But the danger in that, I think, is that you end up potentially, not always, but potentially covering topics that you kind of missed the boat a bit, or you're a bit late. You might want to almost select the topic a bit close to the time. I'm not going to ask for, you know, the perfect amount of weeks to promote an event for and how that should play out, because that will obviously depend on the circumstances. But is that something, Felicia, that you consider when you're sort of building events, making the content really relevant for a moment in time?
100%. We do it all the time. And I know you say there isn't a perfect time. There isn't, but we try to give it about 6 weeks, even for an event that we'd consider to be small. 6 weeks, I believe, is a good amount of time to launch it. You know, give that first, we're having an event, what's it about, who's going to be there, what you're going to get out of it. That should happen over about a 6 week period, because you still need to factor in first reminder, second reminder, it's tomorrow. You know, you need all of that communication. And even I've given you all of those. You just tell me where it is. Sometimes people just fail to tell me, where is it? How can you get there? But I think larger events need longer, you know, so that's why there is no silver bullet for that. Unfortunately, you have to just see how big is the event, how much information do I really need to get out there, how many people am I trying to fill. So yeah, you just really need to figure out what your pattern is, look at your data as well, and look at where you find you get registrations. We often look at curves of registration. We have what we've always called the hockey stick, because the closer you get to the date, it just ticks right up. But we know when the hockey stick's likely to occur for the different types of events that we run. So you have to look at your own data and figure out what yours are.
Yeah, of course. So it wouldn't be a marketing webinar if we weren't talking about the buyer journey. Steve, do you think there is a way that we can actually tailor the type of events that we run in line with the buyer journey? Or do you think that just starts to get too complicated and a nice idea, but realistically not doable?
No, I think it's really important, David. I think it's essential, in fact. And just listening into just Felicia talking then, it's remembering that you want your events plural and in some form of order and daisy chain, right? Don't just look at your big flagship event on its own and forget the other little satellite events that go with it. So that's the first point, is when you're doing your event planning, it's events planning, not event. The type of event you use, if we keep a really simple buyer journey of somebody who's never heard of you before, so you're building awareness through to opportunity, so you're trying to convert them into a lead, and then at post-event, post-lead for a salesperson to convert, then typically speaking, the bigger events are better earlier on the journey, because you're more likely to have that gravitational pull to draw people in. But I mentioned this earlier, events are one-to-one as well. I would think about smaller events and digital. So webinars, it's a kind of intellectual debate as to whether they're an event per se, but the idea of hundreds of people, thousands of people attending something early on in the journey will then leave you with a smaller number of people that then need something else, maybe a briefing or a round table or some kind of community event, through to perhaps digital events that are one to very few, through to digital or physical events that are one-to-one. And Felicia made a brilliant point about the basics as well. Just don't forget to tell people where it is and when it is. But that also applies to your colleagues as well. So if you spent all this money on getting people through that buyer journey and matching the right events, remember it's still a cost until something is sold. So the salesperson who's at the end of that chain, who's now sitting on an event that's one-to-one, make sure they know what they're doing as well, i.e. where do they need to go to meet them? What's all of the backstory you've got? Well, David went to our big conference. He then came to that regional seminar. He then sat in on that workshop. He then had a webinar with colleague X, and you're now meeting him one-to-one. Make sure they've got the audit trail of stuff as well, excuse me, as well, because it gives a continuity and flow. So long answer again, but I think it's really important to think about how you marry events up into series rather than in isolation.
Yeah, and Felicia, I can see you nodding vigorously along there. So did you have anything to comment on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And you ended that, what you just said, with marry. And I've been doing a lot about, you know, marriage and engagement when it comes to your, you know, client pool and your prospect pool, of how are you going to take it from that initial, hey, will you go out with me? Hey, let's go on a date, let's have an event, all the way through to, oh, good, we're getting married and we're having some children. God knows how you have business children, but maybe those are just contracts. But I think the only way you can do that is through partnership and through integration. Like a lot of that data you're just talking about has to be fed into sales systems. And we're not living in the age of writing on the back of business cards who I met, why, when, and where, and then throwing the business cards away. That's just so archaic, and we shouldn't even be talking about it. But unfortunately, I think people are still doing that, but with tech. So they're acquiring tech, potentially disparate pieces of technology, trying to piece them together. It kind of becomes the equivalent of like the back of the business card, because that piece of tech lives there, that piece of tech lives there. They don't talk to each other. No one is saying you shouldn't explore and that you shouldn't have pieces of technology that you think work for you. That's absolutely fine. They have to talk to each other. They must connect. If they don't integrate through some kind of API, then probably consider moving on, because it's just going to get lost, and then your salespeople won't feel informed. Your attendees will feel like you didn't care in the end, that it's no marriage, but it was just a quick date because you didn't do the right level of follow-up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll talk about technology in a moment. But just before we do, we're going to launch another poll, which again should be on your screen on the right hand side, sorry. And it should say, do you find attendees expect more digital features from your events now than before, i.e. mobile apps, etc.? A, yes, they expect more. B, about the same. Or C, no, they expect fewer digital features. So while we wait for those to come in, Steve, let's go to you on this one. Obviously, you've got your audience there. You've done a great job of promoting them. Everyone's in the room. Fantastic. Brilliant. But you obviously need to keep them engaged and make sure they have a good experience. And one way you can do that is, of course, using technology. So for you, where does that come into play? And do you have any examples where you've seen tech being used really powerfully?
Yeah, I mean, you can use it at all stages. We mentioned already pre-event to get people there. We've touched a little bit on it in event in terms of technologies for basic tools to help with networking or icebreakers or quizzes or something that gets engagement up. But I think post-event, there's a real opportunity as well. So remember also, you've got two audiences for any event. You've got those that turned up and those that didn't. And I think sometimes those that didn't can be a bit forgotten in this. So creating output of the event in very simple terms. Felicia, thanks ever so much for coming for our event. Here's some of the highlights, and then putting her on a journey. David, sorry we missed you at the event, but here's some of the highlights, and then putting you on a journey. Technology can do that perfectly. Felicia's point around dating and trying to make people feel special, I'm led to believe is quite important when it comes to dating. So why not apply some of this? And technology can keep that one-to-one feeling, even though it's tech in the background. But human needs to be wed to it as well, i.e. make sure the humanity of the message is there, not just dear esteemed customer, thank you for coming to our event. Here is a link to a thing. Make it feel like it's somebody chatting to you. Even non-standard times of sending. It's a really subtle thing, but if you're sending it at 5:07 p.m. rather than 5 p.m., that is the sort of thing that unconsciously people might notice as it's just sent because it was sent, not it's an automated message that goes out at 5 p.m. So there's lots of ways you can use the tech to keep the relationship moving along. Events normally create a lot of good content. So make sure you've invested a little bit of extra effort in somebody capturing that content for you, whether that's in still pictures, video, written. You've then got probably quite a lot in your arsenal to talk to them for weeks. And I generally would argue that if you've got a 6-week run-up, as Felicia's mentioned, you probably want at least double that as post-event follow-up. It really will depend on this call today as to the typical lead time of your sales as well. But if something takes weeks to sell or months to sell, don't just assume 4 weeks after the event you can stop and call it a day. You might need a lot longer just to keep people going. So to do that, use the tech, but try and manufacture content that gives you a legitimate reason to be in touch every single time.
Yeah, and Felicia, what about yourself? What examples have you seen of technology being used in a really powerful way?
I think I keep saying integrations, but I think maybe I should call it journey mapping, of like trying to figure out what you need to capture along which part of the journey. Who is it benefiting? Are you doing something for you? Are you doing something for your attendees? I think making sure that if there's an app, you then support that app with the marketing and the email that goes out to say, there's an app and you should download that app. And if you do download the app, this is what you can do with the app. It's back to basics, unfortunately. I know I'd love to be sort of saying it's the AI integrations, like all that's happening. There's AI that's doing some phenomenal things at the moment. It's making me go, oh my gosh, I didn't know you could do that. And I'm really excited for what those new things are going to do. Even Cvent, we're building, AI into our venue sourcing so that it can help people write RFPs quicker and help hotels respond to those RFPs quicker, which saves time, drives efficiency, and it's really cool, quite frankly. So cool things are good. But I just think you need to get the basics right. If you do all of that right communication of what you've got, why, when, how to use it, I think you're going to probably win. And people have a really smooth journey and a nice experience at your event and they feel informed. I think, Steve, you mentioned about people being very fearful of the meetups of like, I've given you extra time to network, so by George, you're going to go and network. Well, what if in the app, just as many apps do, there's the matchmaking where you can kind of just see who your birds of a feather are, or sometimes we do that. We do birds of a feather meetups. So it's like, if you're first timers and you've never come to an event like this before, you're all first timers, go this way. And you can see other first timers in the app just like you. And then you'll be like, oh, Sarah, you're new. So it just makes sense to use it for the right purpose of the journey.
It's back to that humanizing it again, David. Sorry. It's the nudging, right? You don't have to make technology take control. But to Felicia's point, and again, this is a regional observation. I've worked in North America quite a lot where it's a different game, but I'm based in Europe, and in Europe, generally speaking, people are a bit hesitant. Well, recognizing that and then using technology to help nudge, to Felicia's point, is a bit like my days at my school disco, where all the boys were on one side and all the girls on the other, and it just took one soul to go, do you want to dance with my friend? And away we went, and everybody then went, oh, it's not so threatening after all. And that's where Felicia's example of just using tech to nudge people into the direction of stuff of, whether it's random I was going to say hookups, but that's the wrong kind of parlance for building relationships, but connecting people for some kind of random or general reason, helping them recognize that it's not that scary, versus if you are from a part of the world or you're operating in a part of the world where there's different cultural behaviors, don't try and apply one size fits all. Think about the school disco room and how likely kids are to mix versus trying to just use every technology you possibly can, because that's just confusing and feels very impersonal.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think you mentioned it's about making it human, and there's probably can't think of the word, but whatever. There's a desire to kind of use more technology because it's new and it's exciting and it can do these things that my competitor's not doing. But ultimately, if it's kind of confusing that experience for the attendee, it's probably not worth it, right? You want to make it just as smooth and as painless as possible, and that's kind of where the technology comes in. Would you agree, Felicia?
I mean, absolutely. That should be your real driver, for using event technology. I really don't think that anybody's out there buying like badging technology just for the love of it. Like it can be one of the most basic things you need at an event as a badge. But you should be thinking, how is this gonna, when my people come up, are they gonna be queuing down the corridor, or is it got there, didn't have to faff about too much for my QR code? I could just put my name in because I didn't have the QR code. I'm not going to lie, I went to an event recently, and I can only say this because we didn't do the badging, so I'm quite happy to shout it out. I won't mention any names, but I went to an event recently, and I could see it said, okay, scan your QR code, and I was like, oh, blast, I didn't remember that. And they were like, well, just go searching through your emails. And I was like, yeah, okay, I could do that, or I just put my name in. I said, no, you can't do that. You have to find your QR code. It was just, and that's your first experience. And I'm not going to lie, the event was fantastic. It was great. But imagine that is your first moment and you're there, you're coming on, you've got all your bags and everything. That shouldn't be what you want to invest in. You should be making it so that the person's just like, oh, great, I'm in. Oh, what's next? Oh, I've got a ping on my phone. Oh, great, good. And they might want to come back. They feel so happy to talk to you and do business with you. So I think you really have to think that the driver for buying tech, first of all, should be about the people and their experience. Then, yes, internal, needs and all of that for your people internally.
Yeah. So let's have a look at those poll results, which you might remember we asked a few minutes ago. So we asked, do you find attendees expect more digital features from your events now than before, or less? So perhaps unsurprisingly, 48% said yes, they expect more. 49% said about the same. And just 3% said they actually expect fewer digital features. So, Felicia, Steve, does anything about that kind of surprise you, or is that about where you would have expected it to be?
It's half and half, isn't it? So
yeah, we do like a 48-52 kind of vote historically in this part of the world. So it can make quite major changes and decisions. Again, there's probably a real range of people listening in. And I think the bit I would say is, don't just do what everyone else seems to be doing. To Felicia's point on experience, what's the right, know your audience, know the experience that's best for them, walk the floor. And I'm very much of the view to your previous question of keep it simple, stupid. Use technology when technology is going to help, but don't put it in the way of people. If you've got an audience that are less technology friendly, don't make it a barrier to entry, as Felicia's described with that. Computer says no if you haven't got your QR code. And if you've done the user mapping, what's the customer journey? To get into your event, don't just start at the door, work back from there and go, where in the world is it? What are the transport links? What's going on that day that there might be, travel problems? Do you adjust your agenda? If there's going to be a queue because you can't avoid a queue, how do you make the queue more appealing? Well, get your staff to hand out teas or coffees or pastries along the queue. That doesn't need technology. That just needs a bit of humanity to it. But there might be things you can do with the app in the queue. If there's going to be a queue, get them straight onto the Wi-Fi before they're in. Give them the app to go, here's a quiz you can do that might win you something with one of our sponsors whilst you're waiting to come in. Whatever it might be, you'll only get that insight if you've truly tried to walk in the shoes of those that you're putting into the room and the whole way through the day. So it's great to use tech. I'm a big advocate, but don't just do the kind of what everyone else is doing, keeping up with the Joneses. Really make sure it's right for you and your audience.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Oh, sorry, Felicia, go ahead.
Also, I think also I'm going to say something that's like a bit wild, but don't over-engineer it, but also don't be afraid to invest in what you think is just going to enhance that smoothness for people. Because I know that some people say, well, my event's not big enough, so I won't do that. Or, I just didn't see. And that also, I think, is a bit of a barrier, because you shouldn't undermine your event and say, oh, it's not big enough, so I won't invest in the technology. If you do what we've been saying, where you see your events as one after the other, a journey, maybe it's not just that event. Maybe you can negotiate with your provider to say, I'm going to have a series of events, and over that series, this many people are going to turn up. So can I just create the app that will just run across the series? Fine. Then it's not 20 people and 20 people. It might, in total, you might have 150 people that are going to use that app, but it's across the series. So I think you shouldn't be shy as well of investing. I've seen, we use beacon technology to track where people are during Cvent Connect Europe. I love it because it helps me to figure out for the next time, okay, people tend to gather there at this time of day and whatnot. I love it. I'm very lucky I get to use Cvent technology and I don't have to, invest in it. But I think if I ever left, I'm not, if I ever did, at least I know that exists. And if I had an event that needed it, I would consider using that technology again.
Yeah. And just a very quick reminder to our audience as well, before we forget, there will be a Q&A at the end of today's session. So please do get your questions in. As I say, perfect time to ask. So yeah, please do get them in. Steve, you mentioned earlier that, I can't remember if you still believed this or not, but you certainly did at some point believe that the sort of post-event bit was the most important part. So how do you keep that relationship going? Is it just a case of following up with materials from the day? How do you approach it?
Yeah, so for clarity's sake, post-event is still, if I had to divide, so important, because you are, as I said, an event is a cost, and marketing people are not always popular people in their organization because we spend money. Most organizations like people to make money too. So thinking about that is critical. To your point of what do you send them? Well, events do create quite a lot of content, one. Two, work with your salespeople. They'll know probably better than us as to what tends to press the buttons a bit further down that buyer's journey. What are they interested in? It won't necessarily hey, here's the big bang content from us. It might be basic practical tools. So for example, if you've got somebody into an opportunity through the event is interested in you, how do you offer case studies? How do you offer calculators or tools that help them justify what you're recommending they spend? So Felicia mentioned she's got a whole suite of great tech for Cvents. or creating tools that say, look, this is what your ROI could be for your next series of events by just employing this technology, I'm sure is the sort of thing Felicia and her team will do, but anyone can do that. The other bit that is the difference between success or failure is, again, sales and marketing alignment and understanding what sales think event success looks like. So we might get 500 people to an event and we all backslap each other and high five and we go home happy. But if that converts to 0 leads, it's a waste of money. Knowing what salespeople need in terms of their sales quota is where I would always start for attendees on bums on a seat for an event. So let's just paint a very quick picture that your sales team need 10 sales for the year and they convert at 1 in 4 opportunities. So for every 40 opportunities, they'll make the 10 sales. Okay, we've got a benchmark that says we need 40 people to come out of our process as leads and then sales leads, and they should convert. Okay, well, it takes 1 in 10 people to attend an event, and that therefore means we need 400 bums on seats. So we've got confidence. And then you can go even further and go, right, what's the typical response rate? It is 10%, right? Well, then you need 4,000 people in your starting pot to get 400 people to attend, to get 40 through to sales leads, to get 10 sales. That means sales are high-fiving you, not we're high-fiving each other. So alongside the content you've asked, just think about the rigor of what are you ultimately trying to achieve. A great event maybe, but you're probably trying to help achieve sales or some form of commercial return, of which an event is just part of that journey.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that part of the issue for you, Felicia? Do you find that, you know, you run an event and there's almost an inclination to think, well, we got, 300 people through the door, so let's now over to the salespeople. Whereas actually the follow-up might even be another event. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
There's no way on this God's green earth that I'm going to be allowed to run an event and get 300 people and then turn around and just do the next one. And that's because of the type of company I work for. But also it's just, Steve, right, any marketer knows that you have to justify the cost of your events. We're already starting to look at next year's budgets. In order for me to justify going to particular trade shows, running events that I run, I have to show, and there are not even spreadsheets, it's like Tableau dashboards and whatever dashboards you're using that are showcasing, well, that funnel that you just mentioned, Steve, like it shows our entire funnel and the opportunities at the end of it and the closed won business at the end of it. And that's the only way I can continue to do those events. And I know we have these conversations with people a lot that they are being pressured because the cost of events has risen so much through food and beverage, staff, travel, wood, materials. The cost has gone up so much that there is a need to justify that spend through the funnel that was just outlined just there. Seniors are looking at it, and in some cases we're talking millions. So, you cannot just be a cost to the business. You have to be a revenue generator. So that post-event, it has to be wise. Like you said, sometimes it is another event you're offering, but you just need to nurture, just to keep nurturing who you've got. Don't let it be a waste. And make sure that your sales team are armed with, like I said earlier, the data, but the softer data of who they met so that they can be effective in their follow-ups. And they'll like you for it as well. They have targets to reach. So, every time you put a target in front of a salesperson, they kind of thank you for it because at least they know what they're working towards. And then you're working together. But I would also say, just to round that off, the conversations we're having with our prospects, we're not just having them actually anymore with event planners and marketers, we're having them with the CFOs and the CIOs. And it's like more people are coming around the table because there just seems to be a heightened interest in the technology, the event technology and the event side of the business than there ever has been before. And maybe that's because they recognized during the pandemic they're very important. But who knows? We're definitely excited to have more CFO conversations.
Yeah. And let's I want to go a bit deeper into proving the success of the event in a minute, but just before we do, we're going to launch another poll for the audience. So again, on the right hand side of your screen, it should be there. And we want to ask, what metrics do you use to measure the success of your events? Revenue generation, lead volume, feedback, attendee engagement. Which ones stand out to you guys? Felicia, where would you kind of start with that, do you think?
Attendee engagement is a big thing for me. I think it's just so important because I feel like if you're engaging your attendees and then you have your goals, you'll get what you need. everything else should fall into place. If you have your goals for the event and then you drive that all through attendee engagement, that should mean that you engage them to the point of your goal. So if you're trying to heighten your brand and that's your goal, and you say, right, I'm going to, like we spoke about gamification earlier, I'm going to do lots of things where they can interact with my brand, and then I can see how much they've interacted with my brand, and then I do a little quiz to see if they got it. Then you'll understand, okay, goal hit, but that's all through the engagement. Again, leads, I want them to make appointments on site. So I'll give them the tools to make the appointments, then on it goes, or lead capture. So you just have to really drive your attendees to do what it is you want them to do through the tools.
And Steve, what about you? What do you think, the best ways to really prove the success of an event?
Well, firstly, understanding what the event's about, and I put my judging hat on for both the AEO, but I also judge for B2B marketing, Dave, as you know, and having just done both of them quite recently, one of the things that we'll always scrutinise for is what type of event is it? So to Felicia's point, if it's a brand building event versus a new business event where you're looking for leads versus a customer engagement event, then what's the first objective and how have you clearly met it? And they will have potentially different measures. So if you're in a lucky position that the scrutiny on you is just to get a brand growth or a brand position, then actually you're not going to need so much post-event follow-up as you will if you are trying to generate new leads for net new business. If it's customer engagement, again, there'll be different metrics. So I think it's marrying the measures of success to the relevance and the type of event and indeed the objectives of the event. So it's not one answer, but it is certainly about a matching to what the business expects you're doing with that event, which, as I said, is a cost until there's some kind of business outcome.
Yeah. I mean, is there such thing as just a brand building event anymore? Or is there so much pressure on marketing that they have to get some sort of new business from it? Otherwise, it's a failure.
No, I think that would be a miss from organizations. Maybe they're not the biggest events, but it depends on what kind of, organizational industry you're in. If you imagine you're launching a car, there is something still in that, the elegance of it and the name, I'm not going to mention any car company specifically, but that the brand, what's the word? It's not efficacy, but it's much more how you feel about it. Like, it's so important for buying a car. It's that kind of purchase, that consumerism is very into the brand still. Whereas maybe on the B2B front, there's different reasons why, and we're having different kinds of conversations, and we're looking at feature-based, parodies rather than just the brand. So I think it just depends on what kind of organization you're on. If you, again, pharmaceutical, I don't think they're there doing brand building events. I think they're there to talk about what's important to them, medicine. So it's different,
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm just noticed we've got the poll responses have come in. So again, we asked, which metrics do you use to measure the success of your events? 12%, just 12% selected revenue generated. 26% selected lead volume, which personally doesn't surprise me. If anything, I thought it might be a bit higher. Feedback, 29%, and attendee engagement, 33%. Felicia, does that revenue generation being so low kind of relax you a bit? Do you is a little bit less pressure on you?
I mean, we've got to look at who's on this. If you fancy putting who you are in the chat, tell me, because if you are the CFOs or the CEOs of your businesses, I'm sure revenue would be much higher on the agenda. But as we are, like, we know as events and marketing professionals, like I said, that you will get to the revenue if you need to, when you need to, but I don't think you expect that people will come to your event and sign on the dotted line. It would be lovely, but we are here for a slightly different purpose, and that attendee engagement is going to do something for you that will lead you to that final goal. For some people, they're trying to get memberships. For some people, it's just about community building. And that, once they realize this is the place I want to be, again, I shouldn't be name dropping any companies, but I love HubSpot. And I love HubSpot because they build communities and therefore they expect revenue at some point. But that's not why they have a podcast.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Great. So I think that kind of concludes my sort of main questions. I know we've got a few questions that have come in from our lovely audience today. So let's start with the first one I can see. If you had to select just one top tip, what is the ultimate recommendation you would make in terms of communications to drive as many people as possible to your event? Steve, let's start with you for that one.
It's a really good question. I think know your audience. And by that, the communication channel you use to get the message to them needs to be right for them, not right for how you always communicate. So in simple terms, it might be email, it might be social media, it might be a telephone call, it might be through the post, it might be on the side of a bus or on the side of a building. So think about where are they most likely to see your message first and foremost, not what the message is, where will they find it?
Yeah. And Felicia, what about you? What would be your top tip?
Ooh, I really like know your audience, because I was about to say, video, but I still think something about the humanity of it. And that's why I think people say video and audio is probably going to be a much more impactful tool than some of the other things that we would use. And that's because I think you get that moment. Like, I make lots of pre-event videos and I'm like, hey, it's Felicia again, come along, la la la. And I'm always, very upbeat in them, but I think people watch them and they like them and they resonate with them because there's a bit of humanity in there. But I think that's also because my audience likes that format. So a bit of a mix with what Steve just said. You have to know, maybe there's a group of people out there that are just like, video's not my thing. Just send me some informative email and I'll get back to you.
No, good answer. Very good answer. So, Steve, let's come to you for the second question that we've got in. What is your view of running English language events in other countries, e.g. France, Spain, Germany? Is localizing always better?
It's another good question. I think the boring answer is it depends. So the two factors for me would be your market. If I take banking, for example, the international language of banking is English. So I say in that instance, it's a probably safe bet that you could use English for your event, because although they might be from other countries, that if they're in that space, they're likely to have to know and operate in English. The second one is, how do you sell if that first one doesn't apply? And I see this quite often, not just with events, but written communication, that you'll have it written in email. You'll try and generate an opportunity. So let's say you get people to an event, but the salespeople in your room will speak local language. I would try and tie up from the get-go. So ultimately, if your sales force are German speaking, I'd want everything, including the communication, to go out in German for that particular event. Those would be my two kind of watches in terms of generally where to go.
Yeah, Felicia,
I completely agree. I think, we do that as well. We look at where our people are coming from and how much interaction we have with them, and we ask for feedback ahead of time. So, we'll ask them, would you prefer to communicate in this language or this language, so that we can understand over time. And then, as a lot of companies do, you build a sales force or a workforce there. Sometimes it's just one. We have one person in Amsterdam right now. We'll see, keep our eye on it and see what happens. But, people typically say Amsterdam is more English speaking. So we might want to do that, but we'll ask our person on the ground, how are they communicating with you? What language are they speaking in with you? If he says, actually, people are mostly speaking, oh gosh, what's the language? It's Deutsch. What's the language? Someone help.
Dutch.
Yeah.
Deutsch is German, Dutch is Amsterdam. So if someone said, well, that's the language that people are communicating with me in, then why on earth would I have an event in English? Just because of my assumptions that in Amsterdam you should speak English. That's not a thing. You should definitely listen to what's happening on the ground there. Yeah,
no, it's a very fair point. So we've got time for just a couple more questions, I think, and then we'll wrap things up, because I know everyone is very busy. Steve, let's come back to you for this one. What is your view about the success of hybrid events? We find it difficult to have the right balance between attendance online and in person. Sometimes the room can feel a bit empty, and it might feel like an unsuccessful event to those there. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, isn't it? I mean, firstly, the doing the maths on likely attendees, so booking a room that's appropriate for your ambition, i.e. if you're likely to get 50 people and you've booked a 500 capacity room, that's going to make it feel a bit airy. So trying where you can. I appreciate that's a really obvious thing to say. I don't think people mind sometimes, by the way, if you're a bit crammed in, it feels like it's a good event, particularly if it's not a long event. Secondly, I think the obvious one is down to the scripting and the choreography of the event. If you are likely to have a much larger online presence, then I would think about the quality of being in the room and the quantity outside of the room. So how can you curate the day that means that those in the room, it doesn't feel like it was a second-rate citizen event for them. So you might have a slightly different, you might have breakouts that are different for them, premium for them. Secondly, if you're recording it, sounds like they would be in their question on using cameras, good camera angles that don't make the room look half empty. I know, again, obvious ones, but I think traditional events, production companies haven't all caught up with this, that you can make an event look quite busy from the outside, and therefore people internally don't feel as obviously apart. The other one is I would always play a game of Space Invaders. I learned this unashamedly for going for Disney in Florida this Easter, is that they always, when they get you in, because it's so busy, space is the enemy, i.e. if you sit down, again, culturally, some people will just always look to sit in a gap because they don't like humans near them. Make it fun, make it like, look, we're Space Invaders, any space you can see, go and fill it, go and sit next to people, everyone shuffle up to the right, all those sorts of things that can help the room feel a bit like everyone's together in one place.
Yeah, no, good advice indeed. So Felicia, I think we've got time for one final question. I'll come to you for this one. So how can we find the right balance between maintaining regular touch points for our attendees without bombarding them? How much communication is too much?
So the best thing to do is to keep your ear to the ground of your data, and that is to look regularly at the behavior of what people are doing the more you communicate with them, and then find ways to we have lots of what we call customer listening and focus groups. Some of it is for product, but some of it sometimes is just to ask, how are you feeling about how we talk to you? And that, I think, is, again, back to the most human thing you can do, is just ask me, is it okay if I text you? And if you say no, I won't text you. So then how would you like me to communicate with you? And I just think, I know that requires response, because we do have, engaged audiences and unengaged audiences, but take your engaged audience very seriously, because they have done something with you that shows that they are interested in you somehow. So that should be the audience that you really do cater to, nurture, ask questions of. But don't be shy. I think I'd finish that by saying, go for it. Talk to them, make sure it's relevant, and then send them as many relevant pieces of communication as you think you want to, and wait for them to tell you otherwise, rather than going gently and then missing the boat.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much. So Steve, Felicia, thank you very much for your all your expertise that you shared with us today. And to our viewers as well, thank you for your great questions. And we hope you found today's session helpful. If you'd like to hear more from Steve or Felicia, feel free to reach out to them on LinkedIn, and we'll be putting their details in the chat now. And also, if you want to listen back to any of today's session, this webinar will be available on demand, so you can watch again at a time that suits you. So Felicia, I know that Cvent have got a few events coming up in the works. Do you want to talk us through those quickly before we say goodbye?
So first of all, we have Cvent Connect Europe coming up. This is kind of like my baby. I shouldn't say it because I shouldn't be that close to this event, but it's coming up on the 7th, 8th and 9th of November, the 7th being a training day where you can really deep dive into some of these types of things we've spoken about in terms of technology. You can learn the technology and get certified. And then the 8th and 9th of November are full days of learning, best practice sharing. We've got celebrity speakers. We've got a fantastic, outstanding after party, which I'm curating myself. And it's all taking place at the Hilton London Metropole, which is very central, near Paddington in London. There's also Cvent Connect happening in Frankfurt. So for anyone tuning in Germany, and the surrounding countries, you can head over to Frankfurt on the 8th of November. And that might answer that question of how you do things in two countries at the same time. Make sure it's in language in Germany, which it will be, and then in English in London.
Fantastic. So I think that's all we've got time for. Just a final note to say that Cvent are running a survey on your experience session. So we're always looking for ways to improve as well. So if you have any feedback, please do let us know. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again soon.